It's a delight to be here with you this evening. You know, I grew up not far from here, down on Douglas Street, and this was the street here was Ashborough Street, and I delivered papers here on the street, up and down, all around. So this is familiar territory for me. And all of this was in the 1920s, so it's with the sense of recovery of childhood life and childhood experience that I come back to this area after being away for some 60 years or so. The subject that we need to deal with at the present time is somewhat overwhelming. The 20th century. Just think about the 20th century. That was really the, well, I don't know what you call it, the break point or the crisis moment or the transition moment between two great periods. Not periods of human history like, say, from the classical to medieval or medieval to more modern times, but gives no idea whatsoever of what's happening now. And it hardly it can be paralleled with the transition from Paleolithic humans, say 12,000 years ago, and the Neolithic period, when for the first time humans gathered into villages in a permanent village life and cultivated plants and domesticated animals and gave us the foundations of life as we know it. There's a great period, too, the creation of languages, which are all disappearing now. Languages, which is in a sense, a supreme achievement of humans. Languages were created just by the thousands. There were 1,000 languages in Africa. There were certainly well over 1,000 in the Americas during this early period. So we do have, but the transition from the pre-Neolithic to Neolithic was very important. But what's happening at the present time is not simply a change in human history, a new historical moment or a new cultural modification. What is happening now is a change in the very structure of the planet itself, in the very continuance and transformation of all living beings, and the extinction of a fantastic number of these. And so that the planet itself has been assaulted terribly in the 20th century. And we have, in a sense, had no idea of what we were doing. For instance, when we came to this continent, I sometimes suggest that when that first tiny mast appeared over the Atlantic horizon, every living being on this continent, every living and non-living being, might have shuddered with foreboding of what awaited it. Because when we came here, that is the Euro-Americans that settled here, we had no idea of becoming a member of the community of the North American continent. We had no sense of learning from the rivers and the mountains and the birds and the animals and so forth. In fact, we brought with us a little black book. Printing had just been invented, so the Bible was available and everybody could have a Bible, or every group. And so that gave us the answer to all questions. We couldn't learn from this continent because it was all there. We had our educational background. We knew everything. We couldn't learn. We couldn't join the continent. We couldn't learn from the continent. We couldn't be inspired by the continent. We couldn't communicate with the divine in and through the continent. And the only thing that we could do with the continent, or see on the North American continent, was youth. And that is a terrifying thing. We used the continent. We first used the trees. We cut the trees. Then we began to exhaust the soils of the continent. Already in 1793, Hector St. John, who wrote those letters from an American farmer, noted how terribly the farmers of this continent were treating the land and the soil, so that this was a way in which we approached this continent. And then we got our technology and so forth. Well, I don't want to go too much into this, except to say that we have devastated the North American continent in a rather comprehensive manner. Our scientists were going to guide us in how to make the soils more productive. We wanted to outsmart nature. Just as we're trying to outsmart nature by going into space, we want to outsmart gravitation. We want to outsmart the genetic coding now. We were going to outsmart the soil and teach the soil how to produce more and more. But we end up with a devastated land. We were going to teach the rivers how to irrigate the soil, and so we end up with a very disturbed natural world. And now we're losing a species at a very awesome rate. We've developed, like this area now is being developed. Greensboro, Guilford County is being developed. But what does development mean? That means bulldozing the soil, scraping off all the vegetation, every living being. You see Ocala Mall. You see this big area devastated. The issue is at a rather critical moment right now. And one of the things that is most important is to understand the difference between an organic economy and an extractive economy. In fact, the first lesson in economics could very well begin with the difference between an organic, ever-renewing economy and an extractive economy. Because an extractive economy is, of its nature, terminal. Because when we extract the metals from the earth, when we extract the petroleum, it will never be produced again. There will never be any more petroleum on the earth. It will be completely over with. At the present time, our food is transformed petroleum through our fertilizer. Our clothes are made of transformed petroleum. Our automobiles and our airplanes, they function in virtue of petroleum. All our plastics are petroleum-based. Our automobiles, these big, wonderful automobiles, our highways and so forth that are made for a petroleum economy. But the next generation is going to see the end of the petroleum economy in its substantial nature, because by 2050, 80% of the petroleum will be gone. And it will linger on for a while. This is, and what they will have to do. Now, when I was born in the period of the First World War, there were less than 2 billion people on the planet. There were not 2 billion people on the planet until 1930. But already, as the population of this planet has gone from less than 2 billion to almost 6 billion by the end of this century, and by the year 2050 will almost certainly be 8 to 10 billion. So put together the loss of the petroleum and the double of the population. Also, the impoverishment of the soil. Again, though, I don't want to spend too much time with the negative side of what I have to say. But what I do want to do is to deal with the basic causes. Why? If we have the finest spiritual tradition, if we have the wisest of the intellectual traditions, if we have the most wonderful political, legal traditions, why are we doing this? Why are we causing so much damage to the planet Earth and have such total disregard for the planet? We see it all around us every day, and of course this is now worldwide. The great forest of Thailand were being wiped out in a matter of 3 decades. The great forest of Indonesia and of the Southeast Asia, so forth. The rainforest of South America. So, why are we doing this? Well, there are several reasons why. The first reason, or the most basic reason, is that we put a discontinuity between the non-human and the human, and we give all the rights to the human and all the values to the human. The non-human has no rights and no values, so that its only real value is use. So we relate to the natural world in a use relationship. And that's one of the reasons why the Christian interpretation of our relationship to the natural world in terms of stewardship is so inadequate, because stewardship applies to something that you want to use, and you are wise, you have a certain regard for it, you protect it, and you are careful about it, but for use. And the natural world is not primarily for use. The natural world is there for it's divine manifestation. It's where religion is born. And it's also where the inner life of the human is developed. Because if we do not have wonderful outer experience of the stars, of the forest, of the ocean, of the mountains, of the rivers, of the birds, the butterflies, if we do not have these experiences, our imagination is starved. Our emotional sensitivities are not developed. And certainly the spiritual dimension of the interior is not developed. So that the loss of the outer world is the loss of the inner world. If we lived on the moon, our sense of the divine would be as desolate as the lunar landscape. We would have no music, no art, no poetry to speak of, because our imagination would not be developed. We'd have very little imagination. If we lived on the moon, our intelligence would be stunted, because there wouldn't be that many things to know. So we have to get out of the idea that we can use the outer world as the primary relationship, and that when it comes to questions, and there are serious questions of cutting the old-growth forest. There's the question of jobs. There's the question of the rights of the people that own it. There are many problems associated with it. But if we lose the old-growth forest, we lose our souls. It's a soul loss. If children do not see the stars because of the light pollution of our cities, they experience a soul loss. It's not just an aesthetic loss or a kind of a humanistic loss. It's a loss of soul, because this is something that we depend on. So when we think of the natural world, we should think of it something like a child, or any of us. As soon as you see the stars, you have a kind of an ecstatic moment first. Or as you see an animal, or you see a bird or a butterfly, or the forest, or see the trees in the springtime, the first experience is an ecstatic type experience. It's a part of a communion relationship, of experiencing an enlargement of soul. We find ourselves in the natural world. In fact, I did something recently that's somebody sent me a book of verse for children, and I wrote this. The title is, It Takes a Universe. The child awakens to a universe. The mind of the child to a world of meaning. Imagination to a world of beauty. Emotions to a world of intimacy. It takes a universe to make a child, both in outer form and inner spirit. It takes a universe to educate a child. It takes a universe to fulfill a child. Each generation presides over the meeting of these two in succeeding generations. Thus, our nursery rhymes. Those early rhymes, those early stories are the most profound, most lovely, most delightful sources of guidance and inspiration the child will ever have. Starlight, star bright, How memorable, inspiring, instructive these verses of Robert Louis Stevenson from the latter years of the last century. So now we write our own verses, bringing the child and the universe into their mutual fulfillment. The child and the universe and the child, while the stars ring out in the heavens. A person could say this: when I say here, it takes a universe to make a child both in outer form and in a spirit, it takes a universe to make a human in outer form and inner spirit. It takes a universe to fulfill or to supply the needs of a human being, and it takes a universe to fulfill the aspirations of a human being. In fact, the outer world, the universe, is the greater self of our own being. And why are we excited when we see a butterfly? Why are we excited by the universe? The deepest reason, well, there are two deep reasons. One is revelatory of the divine. But the most immediate reason is that we encounter ourselves in the full beauty of what we should be. The universe is our greater self. And what is a human being? A human being is that context in which the universe reflects on itself, reflects on and celebrates itself and its numinous origin in a special mode of conscious self-awareness. Now, this is why religious rituals are integrated to the grace, the special moments of the universe. Religions and civilizations are coordinated with the universe, with the cosmology. And here is the deep flaw in Western civilization. It's the deep difficulty of religion, the difficulty of our whole humanist educational tradition. It lies in this unawareness of that relationship and the exaltation of the human, what's sometimes called human-centeredness. Our religion teaches us the glory of the human, and we become spiritual beings, not appreciating that the universe has a spiritual as well as a physical dimension from the beginning. The universe is the grandeur of the divine. That's why St. Thomas, the greatest of theologians in the medieval period, and who's still the basic source that certainly in the Catholic religious tradition, when he says, he wonders, why are there so many different things in the universe? And he says, there's so many different things in the universe because the divine could not express itself in any one being. It created the great diversity of beings, so that the perfection lacking to one would be supplied by the others, and the whole universe together would participate in, and manifest the divine more than any single being whatsoever. That's a powerful statement. That's a powerful statement. He also says, in his, what's known as the Summa Contra Gentiles, he also says that the integrity of the universe, or the order of the universe, is the ultimate and noblest perfection in things. Now, he does that, and this is the traditional Christian interpretation of the first chapter of Genesis, where after each day, God says it's good. After the first day, says it's good, second day, so forth. But the last day, after the last day of creation, he looks at it, what does he say? What does he say?
It was very good.
What is it?
It was very good.
Ah, yeah, there's a scholar for you. God says it's very good. Now, the interpretation of that, it has to do with this comprehensiveness, that the universe is not put there as a kind of a stage for humans to function in. It's there to be the primary sacred community. It is the sacred community par excellence. And it's why human life is woven into this, and humans are, in a sense, a fulfillment. And peoples have known this all the time, and it's why humans insert themselves into the universe by ritual. At the solstice particularly, at the equinox periods, and then at the harvest period, at the sowing period, and so forth. But the idea of humans and the universe being integral with each other is primary with all the great civilizations. I've been in China. In China, these were coordinated so much that the emperor, at each season of the year, had to move from one part of the palace to another part, had to use different colors in his clothing, different music had to be played. The whole conduct of life had to coordinate with the seasons. And we have this to a certain extent in Christian tradition. We have the Easter. Who will tell me how Easter is identified? If you were going to identify Easter for next year, how would you go about it?
First Sunday after the first full moon after the equinox.
Good. First Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. So it has to be coordinated cosmologically. And that's why the Passover, and this is something that had its benefits but also its negative side. At the Passover, when a springtime festival was historicized, something was gained but something lost. We moved from a cosmological presence of the divine to historical presence of the divine. And we began to lose our cosmological rapport. And so throughout Christianity, it's been a possibility. Now, in earlier times in Christian tradition, there were two books of Revelation. They often spoke. St. Thomas, in his great treatise, says Revelation comes to us in two volumes, the natural world and the Bible, so that you have the two revelatory bases, and you interpret these in relationship to each other. It's why all the symbolisms and so forth of the natural world are so important and so much needed. But one of the things that's happened in the Western world, in fact, the great traumatic experience of the Western world was the experience of the Black Death in 1347 to 1349, when over half the people in the main cities of Italy died in 3 months. In 2 months, in Florence and Siena, well over half the people died. It was the traumatic moment in the whole of Western civilization. In fact, the plague struck the whole Eurasian continent. In China, which had the Black Death before Europe did, the population moved from 120 million to 70 million. And so that, and then in the other intervening countries, it was a terrifying thing across that whole period. But in the West particularly, the explanation of it was missing. They had no idea of germs, and no germ theories. So all they could figure is that the world had become wicked and God was punishing the world. The best thing to do is to be redeemed out of the world. The world was not your home. It was not a place to be. And in the English literature, you have the development of English drama. It all, or a good part of it, was based on the fact that the only thing worthwhile in life is what you take with you when you die, which is your virtues. And so there was a change in the spirituality of Europe after the Black Death. A very spiritual, unworldly development took place. Don't trust the world. Don't trust the natural world. And it was out of this, in reaction to this, that Francis Bacon and the scientific profession developed a contrary attitude when he said, you don't deal with the natural world by getting out of it, but by learning to deal with it. And that's where we get the whole secular, exploitative attitude intensified. It was an effort, Francis Bacon said, to torture nature till you find its secrets and then control it. And that's what the Western world has done. So, on the one hand, the religious traditions abandoned the world. On this, the next way, on the other side, the technologists, the scientists, the secularists said, let's exploit the world. So the planet Earth is, in the West, has been at the mercy of those two attitudes. Now, what I'm proposing is that it's an absolute urgency. If we're going to survive in any integral manner, we have got to change in a decided way. We have to awaken to the order of magnitude of what's happening. And that is the greatest single difficulty that we face. Congress is trying to do away with any provision for the natural world. Congress, and that's one of the things about our government and the legal structure of this continent. In fact, if you go back and study the legal tradition of America, you'll find that very early in the 19th century, this government came together, or the Constitution was signed in 1789, or it went into effect, I believe, in 89. So it was the early 1800s. At that time, the legal profession and the commercial profession bonded together. And government began to, already then, was considering its main purpose to support private initiative, and private development projects were considered public good. And indeed, in many cases it was. It was good, it was beneficial, because there were the grain mills that were set up, there were the road building, the canals that were built, and so forth. So a good many of the private corporation enterprises did have a public consequence, and it was helpful if the people supported, and even government. And that's what developed, even the corporations eventually got the right of what's called eminent domain. I see it's in the papers these days, this idea of eminent domain. It was in this area the effort to give those who want to build the ballpark. There was the Council of Greensboro, I believe, or was it the legislature that wanted to give the builders of it the right of eminent domain to take the property. I don't know if you caught that in the paper. And you also have, and particularly in this state, a legislature that is so unwilling to deal with the corporations that it will not even deal with the hog industry and lets the hog industry still be freed from the normal rules regarding industry and the territorial demands and restrictions and that. But coming back though, this need that we have right now, and the greatest single need, I would say, is to understand, as regards the planet Earth, that there are not two economies, an Earth economy and a human economy. There's one economy. And the first law of economics, along with the other law that I mentioned, the first law of economics has to be to preserve the integrity of the natural systems, because human economy is a subsystem of the Earth economy, and how to have a rising gross national product or a rising gross human product with devastating the Earth's product, it's just plain silly. But until recently, and it has changed in the last 10 years, at least the beginnings of a change. Until then, there was only one person that I could find in the economic sphere that was pointing out that this is a single economy, just like it's a single health, not a human health and a health of the natural world, because you cannot have well humans on a sick planet, so forth. So that this sense that there is there's one sacred community, there's one health community, there's one economic community, there's a law community, there's a single law community. And for the human, what the other species do under their genetic coding, for instance, say habitat. Nature works out a basic biological law that every species should have opposed species or conditions that limit each species. So no one species would overwhelm the others. But humans, by cunning, we are expected we're expected by our reason not to subvert that, but to follow that. But what the rest of the world does by the imperative of their genetic coding, we have to do by reason. We have no right to take the habitat that's necessary for other modes of being. We have a right to our proper mode, but if we do that, then the whole order of things becomes upset. And we have to eventually deal with that. Well, I don't want to talk too long tonight, except that I would like to do one further thing, and what to do about it. This is a situation where, to my mind, if it had happened, say 1,000 years ago or a couple thousand years ago, a crisis of this nature, would have evoked, I think, a new religion. It's of that nature. And religions come into being, like Buddhism came into being when there was upset in India. The great creations, like the great developments in China, came after a time of crisis. And there was a crisis moment in which the different biblical creative periods come into being. So we have to be grateful for the difficult moments in our personal lives. It's our crisis moments that are creative moments. Because with the universe, even in the natural world, it's the crisis moments where things are done. For instance, for the planet Earth to come into being, there had to be what's called a supernova explosion, because the first generation stars had only hydrogen and helium. They didn't have 90-some elements. Now, how are you going to get the 90-some elements? Well, there was a star, and this happened in many of the stars, not all of them, but first generation stars, go through a supernova period, or some of them do, in which they collapse in enormous heat and then explode and scatter throughout the universe. So there was one star that went through this process. I call it the great sacrificial moment that made the solar system possible, that made the Earth possible, that made life possible, that made intelligence possible. It's some wonderful creative moment had to take place. And this was done by the star, we call it Tiamat. The astronomers in the book that Brian Swim and I have written, where we tell the story of the universe, we give that star a name. The astronomers never did give that star a name. The one out of which the whole solar system was made. 99 and some over 99% in the sun. Then you have these planets around and so forth, and the Earth. The story of the Earth is equally significant to show how it came into being through its stress moments. Well, this, as regards the planet Earth, is a stress moment for the planet and for every living being on the planet, and for every non-living being on the planet. Right now, and that's the significance of the 20th century. This has never happened before. In the 4.5 billion years that the Earth has existed, life has existed for over 2 billion years in minimal form, but and it's only 600 million years that the life has existed on the land areas of the Earth. And the biologists now, like E.O. Wilson, Peter Raven, Norman Myers, these are the people that know the vegetation of the planet Earth more than anybody else. And they tell us that nothing like the present has happened in 65 million years, because 65 million years ago is when the dinosaur period was terminated and a great termination of species took place. But then what came through were the trees, the flowers, the birds, and the mammals. And for 65 million years, the planet Earth has flourished in a magnificent way. I call it the lyric period of the universe story. It's when the Earth became so beautiful, when the bird species became so wonderfully diverse, when the insects developed their role. Now, in this era, something was happening that made humans possible. I don't think you could have humans before you had a transcendently beautiful planet. Because to bear the burden of intelligence, of consciousness, we need inspiration. We need comfort, so to speak, or we need healing. We make mistakes. We need inspiration. The emotions need to be fulfilled, like I said in that little verse that I did, that it takes a universe to heal us. It takes a universe to supply us our imagination. It takes a universe. Now, the important thing about the universe is that the universe is the only self-referent mode of being in the phenomenal world. I'll say that again. The universe is the only self-referent mode of being in the phenomenal world. Everything in the universe is universe-referent, because the universe has no further context in the phenomenal world for its explanation. And when the divine brings the universe into existence, it doesn't make a puppet universe. It endows the universe with the capacity for self-emergence. It's an endowed capacity, but it is the capacity of self-emergence into all the variety of forms of life that come about. And so at this particular moment, humans were possible. After 65 million years of development in the Cenozoic period. And now, the biologists who know most about the life systems of the Earth tell us that nothing this devastating has happened to the planet in 65 million years. All that effort, all that beauty is endangered by humans. It took 65 million years to do it. We can do it. We are doing a large part of it in a century, in my lifetime. In the lifetime of some of us here. And it's an urgent thing to make the next century a creative century. The next generation have to be inspired to take on the great work. Because if this is the terminal phase of the Cenozoic, we need to inaugurate an Ecozoic era. We need to follow this with a positive, creative moment when humans and all the life forms, all the composite members of the planet Earth begin to relate to each other in a creative way, because nothing can survive without everything else. The human cannot be what it should be without the rest of the planet, and that cannot be what it should be fully without the human. We belong here, but everything else belongs here, and we all belong as a single community of existence. So, what is needed to my mind is, and I went down a few points that I wanted to stress as regards what I call a meta-religious creation. What is needed now is a spiritual creativity that has not existed since the last great civilizational process took place at the Christian Western world and the Muslim world. These were the last great creative religious moments. So here are the points that I would make. The first is to understand that the universe, as I just meant, is the human is not the self-referent. That's one of the things that's most important. what we have done, we have turned it upside down. We consider the human as self-referent and everything else getting its meaning from the human. And it does. Everything is related to everything else, and everything gets its meaning from everything else. But so there is a sense in which humans have a very important role that way. But ultimately, the human is not self-referent. The human is a member of a community, of sacred community of existence. Now, the universe has a psychic, spiritual, as well as a physical, material aspect. That's the second thing. These, I would say, are the points I would make if I were outlining what I would call a meta-religious tradition appropriate for this period. One of the reasons why I think this is necessary, because no existing religion is responding to the situation in anything like what's needed. Christianity is not. The Catholic Church certainly is not, which I know better than the others. And because a great deal could be done, but it's not being done. The religions apparently are not able to get any further than what's called a stewardship approach, which is valid. It's valid, but just so inadequate. Now, the third thing, the universe is revelatory. It's not revelation in precisely the sense that the Bible is revelatory, or even in which the Asian religions are revelatory. Revelation is an analogous concept. It's qualitatively different, but it is revelatory. And that's why when the scientists tell us that the universe is mechanistic and random, they don't know how absurd that is, apparently. Because it's the universe as how would you prove that? Well, first of all, you know what something is by what it does. If you have reductionism downward to particles and say that wholes are derivative from particles, and the particle, whatever you find in the particle, what's derivative can't go beyond that. Well, that's true. But the particles themselves have a spiritual as well as a physical dimension. Why? Because anything that's intelligible is already transmaterial. Anything that has intelligibility is transmaterial. Because it's a capacity to be present to things. And another way is we know what a thing is by what it does. Now, if the universe produces spiritual modes of being, if it produces poetry, poetry is as much earth as sand is, or as trees are. And the spiritual aspect of things belongs to the earth. It's an limited earth mode of being. So the universe produces, so a person would have to say that the universe produces spiritual modes of being, therefore it must have that capacity. It must have that capacity to produce an intelligent mode of being. So where else would the intelligence come from? Now, it's always possible that this comes from a direct creation of the divine, but it's a question of whether the divine works that way. But now, the fourth thing I would say is that our sense of the universe that we have now, by empirical observation, which is such a stupendous thing, and all the spiritual traditions of the world seem now to have retreated back to a fixated fundamentalism. Well, it's East or West. Well, it's Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism. There's a certain incapacity to respond to the situation and to deal with the new sense of the universe that we have by our empirical observation. Now, I'm proposing that our empirical observation has given us a new creation story that is in alliance with the Genesis story, but these two stories have to be read in relationship with each other, something like the light. A light, you have to have a twofold explanation of light and of matter itself. There's a twofold explanation, that its energy waves or its particles. See, the particles are waves. There's no way in which you can reduce those two theories to a single theory. You have to use both. Some problems you deal with as though it were wave, some problems you deal with as though it were particle. There are problems that Genesis communicates with us in the Bible. There are things that Genesis doesn't deal with. But there's one thing, there are several things, but there's one thing that Genesis and contemporary science totally agrees with, and that is the universe had a beginning. Which is one thing. There's another thing, too, is that the universe is integral with itself. That it is, everything is intimately related to everything else. There's at least two things. Now, that's the fourth thing. It had a beginning. Now, the fifth thing is the unity. That is the scientists are very clear, and that is why we find our fulfillment in the universe. It's like in a painting. Every part of the painting finds its meaning in the painting as a whole. That's why it has to be a unity, or why in a musical piece, in a symphony, every phrase fits into the pattern whole, and you don't really understand the first phrase until you hear the last phrase, because each moment changes the moment before it. And it's a kind of a continuation and continued transformation of a givenness at the beginning. So, this sense of the integral unity, that's why St. Thomas says that the whole universe together, or the order of the universe, is the ultimate. And no, he doesn't say humans, doesn't even say Christianity. He says the universe. That's the sacred reality. Then the sixth thing is the universe unfolds itself in a sequence of irreversible transformation episodes. That is the most single difficult thing, is irreversibility. The different traditions of the world have an idea of the universe as always was, always would be, and ever-renewing processes of nature. Always was, always would be. And even the Bible, where it comes into being, the universe comes into being at a certain moment, but once it's in being, it functions the way all other cosmologies function, although the human has historical destiny in a non-historical universe. And so that's why you get the Bible, you get the human story. You have no longer any universe story, you only have a human story. Now we have a universe story for the first time, known empirically, and it's a fascinating story. The only time it's been written in a meaningful way, as far as I know, is what Brian Swim and I did in the universe story. Some of them there. It's scientifically valid in every aspect, but it's the first time it's been told as story. Others, Carl Sagan has written essays about the universe. He's never told the story of the universe. And somebody came from England and came to see me in New York when I was there. Says, you know, you wrote that book with Brian, and said, you know, doesn't it seem a little arrogant? You don't give any footnotes, you don't give any quotations, you don't have any equations, and no diagrams. That's kind of taken. Well, I told him, don't take it too serious, it's a story. And I says, you know, Homer didn't put any footnotes in. But the idea, though, and that's the thing of a story. It has a sequence. If it has a beginning, and what the ending of the story is, we don't have any idea. The scientists don't know whether it will continue expanding as it is or whether it will collapse on itself. They don't know. But the irreversibility is what's tough. Because what's done is done. And the most decisive, the most absolute thing humans can do is to extinguish species. Neither God nor humans or anybody else can bring back the extinct species. They replace it some way, but when it's gone, it's gone. And that's why what we are losing is, for the most part, irreplaceable, non-renewable. It's what the 20th century has done. The Carolina parakeet is gone. The passenger pigeon, gone. And you say this for, you know, in Switzerland, they put out what are called the red books, each with the plants, 25,000 species of plants in the process of being extinguished. The birds, they're called the red books of the birds, the mammals, and so forth. And it's just something to see all this beauty forever gone. The next generation after that, is going to have a very, relative to what we have had, what I had in my early years. And that's what's so significant. You see, it took 300,000 years to produce the number of people that were on the planet when I was born, to produce a million or a billion, 800 million, or perhaps 800 million. 1 billion and certain million. Took 300,000 years to do that. Now, in less than 100 years, that has gone to 6 billion. In another 50 years, it'll go to 8 to 10 billion. History is moving fast. It's moving in enormous waves of change. So, and we need to be aware of that, the irreversibility of things. Now, then a person comes, universe, what's it for? Universe, in my mind, is for celebration. Birds sing, fish swim, the trees grow, the water fall. It's so the clouds drift. I once wrote a poem for the wedding of Paul Winter. I don't know if I can remember it well. But look up at the sky. The heavens so blue, the sun so radiant, the clouds so playful, the soaring raptors, the meadows in bloom, the woodland creatures, the rivers singing their way to the sea. Wolf song on the land, whale song in the sea, celebration everywhere, wild, riotous, immense as a monsoon lifting an ocean of joy, then spilling it down over the Appalachian landscape, drenching us all with a deluge of delight. As we open our arms and rush toward each other, Paul and Ches, and to all of us, moved by that vast, compassionate curve that brings all things together in intimate celebration, that's the universe itself. So, this idea of celebration is the basic objective. It's religions thrive on celebration. They die without celebration. That's what a community is. A community celebrates together. If you can't celebrate together, if you can't dance together, and have music together, and share each other in harmony with the larger dimension of things, then if we find fulfillment in youth, it won't work. So, then a person comes to the eighth point these would be the context in which I would shape a meta-religious tradition. And I think myself that we're not going to have the psychic energy, either the insight or the psychic energy, unless we do this. We cannot have the existing cultures, cannot do it, in my mind. Existing religions cannot do it out of the resources they now have. It can only be done. We have to place ourselves in this new context of our experience of the universe. It's a valid thing. We have to get over what the scientists have told us and begin to look at it ourselves and see what it tells us. And we can certainly learn from the science and so forth. But it's a way of doing these things. So that's a little long, but I thank you for staying with it.
You want to take some questions, or? Yeah. All right?
Now we can go from now till 3 in the morning with questions. No, that's all right. I feel comfortable.
If you have any questions, or something close to a question?
Yeah.
You support the outer space exploration that the Americans and the Russians are doing?
Well, let me say that I think for the most part it's, well, let me say this, that it has been helpful in some ways, but I think that anybody that suggests, and Carl Sagan even suggests, that we have a future in space, to me that is out of the question. We're totally earthlings. We've never been in space, so to speak. And we'll never go into space, from my view. We've never been on the moon. We've always been on a piece of the earth in space, or a piece of the earth on the moon. We've never been on the moon. So that to think that we could reproduce in space by human effort and human design what the earth gives us spontaneously is, well, I just find it find it unacceptable, and also to burn up the resources of the earth, trying to survive off the earth, is just counterproductive, totally. Yes?
With so many of the world religions embracing a very fundamentalist attitude, what do you think it will take to get the religions to recognize the truths that science has shown us about the environment and how we're related to it?
Well, that is something that I don't have so far. But I have a little hope in the fact that the economists finally began to understand this. So that about 8 years ago, Herman with doesn't carry very well, but Herman Daly, who wrote that book 20-some years ago called Steady State Economics, pointing out this fact that the human is a subsystem of the Earth's economy and so forth. There was one man before him, 25, 30 years ago, George Rogan, that did a book on the entropy equation and the economic process. These are the two people that did most. Now, if people from 40-some different nations, economists, 2,500, have gathered into a society, International Society for Ecological Economics. And so this is a change that's taken place. Now, even the World Bank, which is a record, it's been a disaster, total disaster, as regards the undeveloped parts of the world, is beginning to, and they had a session on how to go about its relationships with third world countries. They began to realize what they were doing was devastating the natural structure of the various third world countries they were dealing with. And so they had a special meeting, I participated in it somewhat, and they revised their program, whereas they before had done 3 or 4 ecologically oriented projects. Now they claim to be doing 180 or something like that. So there are these changes. Although as regards the World Bank, if a person really examines what they're doing, it's not solving, it's not doing as much as they would claim. But in economics, in law, I don't know exactly how much is being done in medicine, but there are movements of change taking place religiously. There's a serious effort being made to do something about these issues, but insofar as they're done under the rubric of stewardship, to me, to just put the whole thing in, if that is the basic approach, I think that it's just not adequate. But there's a lot can be done in that context, but that to my mind, it misses the point of human-Earth relations when we must develop that rapport. If you don't have this rapport, now it's my hope, or what I generally say, peace among people through peace with the earth, and learn the dynamics of the earth, how the earth, particularly with diversity. Again, with St. Thomas, don't mind me if I talk like a medievalist, but he says, difference, which is the perfection of the universe. Difference, which is the perfection of the universe. Humans are different, but it's a related difference. It's not isolated difference. It's a related difference because it's differences that attract. If you're too much alike, you can't learn from each other. It's only if somebody's different from you that you can learn from, that you can feel sharing something or communicating with something. It has to be different. If it's sameness, it's not non-creative. That's one of the problems with cloning, is nature invented 2 billion years ago. Nature invented before the duality of the generation process. Before that, there was generation by division. One thing divided, had two younger beings and so forth. But then nature decided that it wouldn't go anywhere unless it had two different principles that together formed the next generation 2 billion years ago. And so, but it was a principle of difference. Now, that's why this cloning is so repugnant, basically, to me, is that it does determine, and people say it doesn't determine the personality, and it's true that it doesn't, but it determines the limits of what a person can do. Your genetic coding fixes limits. It determines, to a large extent, bodily size, color of eyes, and so forth, and we begin to get this idea of designer babies. Well, you want babies, well, that's another thing. That's genetic engineering. But we're into that now. Do you want somebody with blonde hair or brunette? Do you want somebody tall or somebody less tall? Do you want this or that? It can be designed, just like they design animals. But it's that margin of uncertainty that's the exciting thing. Now, there are undoubtedly cases where certain deformities can be avoided and so forth, but it's a complex subject, of course, but there are certain principles that are needed. And in actual fact, where we have gone into control, we've messed the situation up. In our agriculture, we invented the worst agriculture humans ever invented, our chemical agriculture. We invented the systems of pollution. We thought we were doing such great things with the petroleum, but nature has a purpose in putting the petroleum, putting the carbon in that process. That's where it's stored. So the chemical balance of the atmosphere could be worked out. If you take that petroleum out of there and burn it and put its refuse into the atmosphere, you're into trouble. You might get a certain benefit from it, but meanwhile, you're going to change the chemistry of the planet. You can do a lot of things, but now we are into a situation of a chemically saturated planet. There was today in the paper, the New York Times today or yesterday, a critique of the book of Coburn. You may have come across that, how the toxics in the atmosphere or in the biosystems are affecting the human endocrine system. The endocrine system is what guides the reproductive process. And it's the reason why, for some reason, associated with this, that the fertility of men particularly has been cut in half, and why the certain changes are taking place. Now, that has been challenged by the EPA, but a person can expect that to be a big subject in the future. But whereas in 1940 we were making 500,000 tons of industrial chemicals every year. Now we're making 200 million tons every year, from 500,000 to 200 million. Things are moving fast. These changes are so extensive. So, well, any more comments, questions? Yeah.
I'm not even sure exactly how to formulate this question, but it does have to do with what we can do in the face of all of these catastrophic processes that we've unleashed, like sorceries and heresies. Do you see any real hope in being able to
counter that?
overcome the consequences that we've set up?
This, what hope can we have that this can be managed, or that change at this order of magnitude is possible for us at the present time, and particularly where governments are supporting the process in this comprehensive way. I say that I have a short-term pessimism and a long-term optimism. I'd have to have hope to do anything. But I think a change is taking place. If we could just begin, I think particularly education. Somebody sent me something the other day, a manuscript on how to recover our sense of the universe through the education of children in the middle years from 6 to 12. That they have the aptitude, they have the conditions and the orientations that they can respond to this. And if they are guided through this, then they can undertake what I call the great work. Every civilization, every age is governed by a great work. Greece had its great work, and its humanistic development and its thought development. India had its great work in the creation of its great vision of the divine. Christianity had its great work in bringing a sense of human devotion to each other and mitigating some of the strife. But all the religions can be identified by the extent to which they betray their principles rather than where they live up to it. But there was a great work, like the Middle Ages. The great work was creating a basically Christian civilization, symbolized in the great cathedrals. Now, there's a story told about 3 men carrying stones in the Middle Ages. The first one was asked, what is he doing? He says, well, I'm carrying stones. Second, what are you doing? I'm supporting my family. Third was asked, what are you doing? I'm building a cathedral. Now, we all have our particular work. It's very different. But all periods of time and all communities have their great work. Now, in this country, the great work, the tragedy is that the great work was eventually a destructive work, to conquer this continent, to cut the forest, to plow the prairies and so forth. It was a conquest use, mystique, that was considered the great work of America. And so with our entrepreneurs, it's not the bad people, it's the good people that are the trouble. Sometimes say, I'd rather deal with bad people than good people. Because good people with an inadequate idea of what's good, the better they are, the worse the consequences. Because they're doing good. The people who are doing these things, and I got a book the other day of the corporate mystic. And I've seen other articles, particularly one where this man said that he had gone through initiations of different spiritual traditions, so forth. It wasn't really till he got into the initiation into the entrepreneurial business world that he really felt he had it. So this is a driven, mystical dynamism. And what is it based on? Again, it's based on Scripture. People think that they're bringing the millennium into being. And the millennium, the last chapters of the Bible describe how there be the strife between the woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and the dragon. And this conflict would take place through history, but there would come a time when the dragon would be chained for 1,000 years. That's mille means 1,000. So millennium has to do with that period when the dragon would be chained and the reign of the saints would be. There would be peace and justice and abundance. Now, the Western civilization has always had that in mind. This period of peace and this period of abundance, particularly abundance. And we've got that now in our consumer society, but Walmart's maybe. But when this did not come by divine guidance somewhere, our modern world has decided that they're going to raise it up through technology and they're going to transform the earth. They have the idea that they're doing a beautiful work. And that's a tragedy of it. Because the people that are doing all these things that are leading to such decline in the life systems of the planet, they think they're doing wonderful things for the next generation, but they're going to give the next generation a desolate planet. They give them a lot of computers and a lot of videotapes, but the question is, what would be left of the birds? What would be left of the trees? What would be left of that part of the thing?
It seems to me that. And do you have any ideas about what of the several generations ahead? Because you talk about always the next generation.
Yeah.
If I could really think about the next generation, or 3 or 6 or 7 generations, then I would probably act very differently. But I forget that over and over again.
Yeah. Well, that is the difficulty, because what we have to inaugurate is not something that's simply long-term, but simply because this has to change now. This has to change now, not tomorrow, but today. And this is an urgency. Now, I am encouraged by the amount of, by the volume of change that is taking place in the different areas of life, in the different professions. And in education, there was Tufts has taken the leadership in education, and it has set up a charter for the future and has formed an organization of university presidents throughout the world, some 200 and some. They changed it recently to the university leaders rather than just presidents, but they are leading the university transformation, because it's university that I am addressing more than anybody else. I have been fortunate to get invited to a number of universities, so that I have done some papers that I hope to be publishing soon on the university, because the university trains the engineers. And when I talk to scientists, I was talking to scientists down at State, North Carolina State, and I was saying that to train the scientists, particularly chemical engineers and the engineering people particularly, without understanding the knowledge that they have and the skills that they have and the discipline of its use. You say it's like giving people a torch and turning them loose in a powder factory. They go to work for Monsanto, work for the military, work for all these industries because that's where the money is. So right now, we live in a world of corporate controls. Governments now are subservient, almost totally subservient to the corporations. And in this country particularly, and this, as I mentioned before, the legal profession and the judiciary, you can find this. There's a fine book written by somebody named Horowitz called The Transformation of American Law. It's a superb book on this issue. There are some other books that deal with it also. But it's a legal structure that is aligned with the economic structure that validates that. And now, when we have a Congress that is supporting this, then we do have a serious problem. So, what can be done? There's an enormous lot is being done, and I just hope, and I could spend hours outlining what's being done in education, elementary school education, as well as the other levels of education. And Harvard has begun to take to develop some sense of this. But and they have the faculty group that is beginning to try to change Harvard. So the different professions are beginning to change. But I don't have any answer. But I would like to see religion change. I think religious people could do an awful lot. The two people in the world that I think could do most as individual people, one would be the Pope, if he would tell the bishops, you see that you're the priest you work with, that they talk to their congregation about the real basic ideas of the planet. They could also do the university. The other person that could do an awful lot would be the general of the Jesuits, because the Jesuits have, by all odds, the most powerful educational establishment ever invented or ever will be invented. They have 600 colleges, universities, high schools throughout every part of the planet. And the general, and they also have the discipline, where, because they're set up on an obedience principle. And the general just gave orders. You see that in these universities and your educational establishment that these issues are taken seriously, and you produce some competent people can speak to this issue. Well, it would be a first effort that I would think of.
Is the World Parliament of Religions got enough of an environmental scope?
The World Parliament of Religions? No, not the World Parliament of Religions. It's not, I was at the last one. Of course, it's only met twice, I believe, in the last 100 years. But the World Council of Churches does a sizable amount. But the Parliament of Religions is not doing much.
But population, overpopulation, probably one of the problems there is about.
Well, that's true, but there are two basic issues that I would identify as would be consumption first, population second.
China is trying to become a first world economy.
Yeah.
They're if they get the same living standard we have, think of what that means for the world.
Yeah, well, if they start using their coal deposits, which is the only source of energy they have, it's going to be.
over there.
Well, it's going to be rough business.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, one more.
Do you see, are you aware of religious are moving? You see religion needing to move?
Well, there are religious communities, particularly Miriam Therese McGillis has one of the show places of the East. And her center is called Genesis Farm, where she is into community-supported agriculture. Also, there is a movement among the sisters of forming a group called Sisters of the Earth. In fact, in Rome, the general superiors of religious orders generally live in Rome. The general superiors of women's religious orders have a council, and they asked me 3 or 4 years ago to write a piece for them. They have a bulletin that's sent to sisters congregations throughout the world in 6 different languages. They asked me to write an essay on sisters as the voice of the earth. They were into this. So there's a great deal being done. So, but my basic thing, it's almost like a crusade, what I call the great work. And the great work is everybody's work. Now, almost inevitably, I talk to college students, and somebody will stand up and say, well, what can I do? Well, I say, what can you do? I say, we need competent people in every field. This is not for law, it's not for religion, it's not for this social work or this or that. It's for everybody, for parents, teachers, medical people, whoever. It's the most comprehensive thing there is. I say, find your talent. What do you like to do? What are you capable of doing? Develop your talent and become competent. We need competent people. And then use your competence effectively in this general direction. But just as one last comment, I'll believe something is really changed when Herman Daly gets the Nobel Prize for economics. Thank you. Thank you. You go ahead.
Thank you, Thomas. Wanted to thank a few people. Wanted to thank Reverend Johnson for being our host here at Faith Community Church. Wanted to thank Jeff Thigpen and Sarah Walls and Laura Linder and Sue Stuckey and David Hurt, who've been, other than Thomas, people who've been working tonight. There are refreshments in the back, courtesy of